and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. Today I want to go over with you some of the principles of timing. I've had people tell me that it's confusing, and it can be confusing. I think more so because I don't have you right beside me so I can point out this is this is that. When you're not taking personal lessons with somebody, then you don't get the benefit of their instruction side by side. So I want to just go over this because it can be confusing for a lot of people. I know I'm not a mathematician, and mathematics is confusing to me, and I understand the timing of music very well, so I can understand why it would be confusing to other people. So we're going to keep it basic. If you already know, it'll be a review. If you're just learning, I think it will help you to understand. And so what we're dealing here is with time signatures, what they really mean. So we'll start out with the first one. We'll do this by charts, and this is the first chart. And I've told you before about time signatures, and I've said, well, 4/4 means you have 4 beats to every measure, and that's true. But what kind of a note gets 1 beat? It would be a quarter note. How do I know that that 4 means quarter note? Well, if you cut something like a pie or a pizza in 4 pieces, you get a quarter. You know, you take a pie, you cut it either way, and you get 4 pieces. So there's 4, and each piece is a quarter of the pie. So therefore, this quarter means that the quarter note is a quarter of that measure. Now, you don't have to write quarter notes all the way through. What you can do is you can write other notes. For example, 2/8 notes equals a quarter, or you might just have 4 quarters, or you might have 2 quarters and 2 rests, or you could even have 16th notes, just the proper amount. There would be more notes, but when you get through, however you write the music, you end up with 4 beats. The main beat being a quarter note. That's what that 4 consists of, or that's what that 4 means. Now, if you take a look at 3/4 time, this is waltz tempo, and you have 3 beats to a measure, but the 1 beat, the main beat, is still the quarter note because I still have that 4 there. So a quarter note gets 1 beat, and you would have to have 3 of them, or the equivalent of 3 of them, to a measure. Well, what about 6/8 time? 6/8 time is a little different. It sounds like quarter. It sounds like 3/4. They both sound like waltz tempo, but in this case, there are 6 beats to the measure. But the main note getting 1 beat would be the 8th note. Here you have the body of the note. You have the stem, and you have the flag. And so you would have 6 of those. That's an 8th. You would have 6 of these 8th notes to a measure. But that doesn't mean you have to write 6 8th notes. You might want to write some quarters, which would be 2 8th notes. So as long as you get the 6 beats to the measure, you can write it in various ways. 6/8 to a measure. Okay, 6/8 time. Well, what about 2/2 time? You're apt to get this in marches. And in marches, this is 2 beats to a measure, but it's a half note that gets 1 beat. Here's a case where the half note that usually gets 2 beats is only getting 1 beat. How do I know it's only getting 1 beat? Because it is the main beat, and it is 1 beat, 2 what normally would be 2 beats. The half note is 1 beat, but you would have 2 of them in a measure. So 2 beats to a measure, and the main note getting 1 beat is a half note. It makes it interesting trying to read that kind of music because you're not used to it, but that's the way it is. If you see a sign that looks like a C, that's the same thing as 4/4 time. Sometimes it's written like that, and people just know what it is. If you see this, it's like a C, but it's split in the middle. There's a line going through it. That's 2/2 time. It's just cut. Sometimes it's called cut time, and it equals 2/2 time. It's just an easier way of writing. So remember, and I think this will make it clearer to you, the top number always represents the total number of beats to the measure, and the bottom number always refers to the kind of note that gets one beat. You can say, 4 beats to a measure and the quarter note gets 1 beat. Then you can figure you can have the equivalent of 4 of them in the measure because it's 4 beats to the measure. So it really does tell you a lot, and you really need to be able to read the music. Now, here are ways of doing it. This is the treble clef. You see it in most of the woodwinds because most of the woodwinds play in the treble clef. Here's your 4/4 time. Here are your 4 quarter notes, 4 beats to the measure, and a fourth is the type of note getting 1 beat, which would be the quarter note. Okay, or you can write it in the C. Here's 4 quarter notes. That's your measure with 4/4. Here are 2 half notes. There's your measure. It's got 2 half notes, but since each half note is equal to 2 beats, you still end up with 4 beats to the measure. Now, how do you count something like this? This is 1, 2. That rest that pops up a rectangular shape on the 3rd line of the staff, that's equal to 2 beats. That's a 2-beat rest. You count that just like you count a half note because it's just 1, 2. This is a symbol for 1 beat. This is a 1-beat rest. And then, of course, this is a quarter note. So if you're counting it, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. You still have your 4 beats to the measure. You have a 2-beat rest followed by a 1-beat rest, which equals 3 beats, and then you have your quarter note, and that's the 4th note. So you still have your 4/4 time. Well, what about this? Here's a half note, which is worth 2 beats. So you have 2 beats here, and then you have your quarter note, your half rest popping up from that 3rd line. When you count lines to a staff, you go from the bottom to the top. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So anything that comes up on top of that 3rd line, like a little rectangular, like this, is actually a 2-beat rest. And this is a 2-beat rest. Well, what about this rest? This is a 4-beat rest. It comes up, it hangs down from the 4th line of the staff. 1, 2, 3, 4. And because it hangs down from the top of the 4th line of the staff, this is worth 4 beats as a rest, where this is worth 2 beats of the rest. Now, what's an easy way to remember this? Well, if you can consider, since something is hanging down, it's heavier, and so therefore it's worth 2 beats more than that which is popping up, which is of less worth in terms of numbers. So this is your 2 beat, this is your 4th beat. Well, what about 8th notes? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You take the quarter note and put it in half, and then you have an 8th note. And so there are 2 8th notes to 1 beat. There are 2 8th notes to 1 quarter. Cut that quarter in half and you've got 2 8ths. You see, there's lots of fractions involved in music. So the way you would count this is 1 and 2 and, 3 and 4 and. You still have your 4-beat measure, but each note is a fraction of the quarter note, so you have more of them. But compile them together, and you still have a 4-beat measure. Well, what about 16th notes? 16th notes are 4 beats to a beat, 4 notes to a beat. Instead of the 8th notes having 2 notes to a beat, the 16ths have 4 notes to a beat. How would I know? Well, it has 2 flags. This is the note stem. These are the stems of the notes. Those lines going across are considered to be flags. And then on a single note, you get just one little flag. But you can get a group of notes and draw a line between them, and they share that flag. So that flag is for all of them. And if you have two, then you get a 16th note. 4 notes to a beat. So how do I get 4 beats out of this for a measure? Well, here's 1 beat because there's 4 notes to a beat. Here's a second beat because there are 4 notes to the beat. And this is a half note. So this half note gets 2 beats. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how you get it. Now, this is a little bit more complicated, and I don't know how much I want to get into it, but this is a dotted 8th and 16th. There are a lot of them in music. They give you a rhythm and a syncopation that you don't get from the regular notes. This note is technically 3 times longer than this note. And there's a reason for that. How do I know this is a dotted 8th and a 16th? Well, this line is the stem of the note, and this line acts as a flag for both of them, so that flag would make it an 8th note, and that dot would make it what's known as a dotted 8th, which is a little bit longer than the 8th note itself. So here we have a dotted 8th. This would be considered to be its flag, and this you put a little extra line on it and it becomes a 16th note. So here's the body of the note, the stem of the note, and that little line here is, of course, a flag, and this little line here is also a flag. So you basically have 1 flag for this dot, the 8th note, and the flag makes it an 8th note, and in this note you add that extra flag, so it's like 2 flags for that, and it becomes a 16th note. Both of them together make 1 beat. So here we have 1 beat with the dotted 8th and 16th, 1 beat for the dotted 8th and 16th, so there's 2 beats. The quarter note is 1 beat, and this is a quarter note, a quarter rest, and that's also 1 beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, of course, you have your whole note. A whole note is worth whatever the measure says it's worth, and since this is 4/4 time, and there are 4 beats to a measure, then this is equal to 4 beats. Now, if I had 3/4 time, then this would be worth 3 beats, because it's worth whatever the time signature says it's worth. So let me just review this a little bit here. 4 quarter notes, 4 quarter notes, 2 half notes, a half rest, a single rest, a quarter note, all equaling 4 beats. A half a note, a half a rest, that is 2 beat a rest. So you still have your 4 beats to the measure. This is a single, it would be the equivalent of the whole note here. It's a whole rest, and you don't play, so you put it in. It's the only measure, it's the only rest that's going to appear in the measure. Then you have your 8th notes, 1, 2. 8th notes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then you have the 16th notes. You have 4 to a beat, 1, 2, and the half note gives you another 2 beats. Then you have your dotted 8ths and 16ths, and sometimes I've seen it the other way around, but not often, where you get the 8th and then where you get the 16th first and then the 8th last. It still is going to be equivalent to 1 beat, though. So 1 beat, 2 beat, 3 with a quarter note, 4 with a quarter rest, and then the whole note. Now, I hope this isn't terribly confusing, but this is the way that it runs, and I have a few more of these to show you. Okay, so we went over the 4/4 time. Let's go over the 3/4 time. 3/4 notes, 3 beats to the measure, and the main note that gets one beat is going to be the quarter note, and I know that because that 4 is here, and that signifies a quarter note. So 3/4 beats to the measure, and so as I wrote down here, 3 beats to the measure, and the 4th note, or the quarter note, is a type of note getting 1 beat. So I can write 3/4 time, which is waltz tempo, 1, 2, 3, they're quarter notes. Or I can have a half note, which is worth 2 beats, and a quarter note, which is worth 1 beat. That still gives me 3 beats to the measure. Or I can have 2 beats, and these are all quarter beats, a quarter rest. You count them like they were quarter notes, but they're quarter rest, so you're not playing, but you're still counting them. That's a part of the measure. 1, 2, and then I have 2 eighth notes, which is a half a quarter, so that's 3/n. 1, 2, 3/n. And then I have the whole rest, which is worth 3 beats because the time signature has put it in 3/4 time, and since it's for the whole measure, that's going to be worth 3 beats. Now this is going to be 2 beats, and the quarter makes it a 3rd beat, so you still end up with 3 beats to the measure. 1, 2, 3. Now I can take this, which is a 2-beat rest, and put a dot beside it. What does the dot do? The dot makes the rest worth half as much more as it would have been. You see, if it's worth 2 beats, then you add another half to it, which is 1 beat. 1 quarter is half of 2, so you get 3 beats out of that. 1, 2, 3. An unusual way to show it, but I've seen it done in music before, so if you ever run across that, 2 beats, rest, and this gives it an extra beat. And usually it's just half as much as it originally is worth. And so 1 is half of 2. That automatically adds another beat rest. So you can count that as a 3-beat measure. Now it's just as simple just to do something like this, you know. But I want to show you what the possibilities are. Now eighth notes. 1/n, 2/n, 3/n. They can be written different ways. I have 4 eighth notes here, and they all have their stems, and this one line becomes a flag for all of them, and they're all connected together. So I don't have to write an eighth note 4 times with each one having a flag. They all have a flag, they all share a flag with this line. And since there are 6 of them, 1/n, 2/n, 3/n, then that makes a full 3-beat measure. I've written these up with a line connecting them. I've written these down with a line connecting them, and so therefore you end up to have a 3-beat measure. Now the dotted 8th and 16th again. Each dotted 8th and 16th is worth a beat. So here's 1 beat, here's a 2nd beat, and then the 3rd beat is this 1 quarter note. So you still have your 3 beats to a measure. And if I'm looking at 16th notes, which have 2 flags instead of 1, here's 1 flag, and here's the other flag. When you have 2 flags instead of 1, you have a 16th. So there are 4 notes to a beat. So here's your 1st beat, here's your 2nd beat, because they're all 16ths, and then this makes the 3rd beat, so you have a full 3 beats here. And then you have the whole note. The whole note is worth 3 beats because the time signature says that there are 3 beats to each measure, so this is going to be a 3-beat note. If it was 4/4 time, like I just showed you a little while ago, then you would have a 4-beat note here, but it's now 3 beats. Now this is not a song. I'm just writing up the different time signatures so that we can figure out how to work the time. Now 6/8 time is also waltz tempo. 6 beats to the measure, and the type of note getting 1 beat is going to be the 8th note. How do I know that? Because the 8 is here. There's no 4 here. It's 8. So therefore, the 8th note is worth 1 beat. So how do I get here's the 8th note. The little body of the note, the stem, and this one line here makes it an 8th note. That's a flag. And you see, here is a flag for all of these 3 notes. Those are all 8th notes. This is 8th rest. This is how they're written. And so this is the way that you can count the time. Now, actually 6 notes to a measure, and the 8th note gets 1 beat. So therefore, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 beats to the measure. They're all 8th notes, 6/8 time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, a dotted quarter is worth 3 beats. How come? A quarter can be divided into 2 8th notes. Or you can take a quarter and make an extra 8th note out of it with a dot, because the dot makes the note worth half of what its original value is, and that split in half is another 8th. So if you take a dotted 8th note, you get 3 beats. If you do 2 of them, you get 6 beats. So you still have 6 beats to the measure. The 8th note still gets 1 beat, but you have 3 8th notes in a dotted quarter, 3 8th notes in another dotted quarter, and you end up with the same 6/8 time. Now I can see where this is going to get confusing if you don't understand timing. If you think in terms of fractions, divisions and subdivisions, eventually it all makes sense. But it's kind of hard to explain because I don't know, if you were sitting here with me, I would ask you, do you understand that? You could ask me questions, and of course I don't have that liberty to do that with you. But at any rate, split that quarter note into 2 8ths. Since the quarter note is also has a dot beside it, that dot gives that another 8th. So actually you're getting 3 8ths here and 3 8ths here, which gives you your 6/8 time. They use that a lot in waltzes. Now here is 3 beats. 1, 2, 3, the dotted quarter is equivalent to 3 8 notes, so you have 3 beats here. Now this is an 8th rest. It's not written like a quarter rest. I showed you the quarter rest before, but here is 1 8th note, here's another 8th note, and here's a 3rd 8th note. So this is worth 3 beats, 1, 2, 3. This is a beat, 4. This is a beat, 5. And this is a beat, because it's an 8th note, 6. So you still get, when you get through, your 6 beats to a measure, with the 8th note getting 1 beat. And you have 8 of them equivalent, so you have 8 of them, so you get a full measure. This is going to be worth 6 beats. It is a full whole rest, and it's going to be worth whatever the time signature says the measure is worth, and the measure is worth 6 beats to the measure. So this whole rest is going to be worth 6 beats. Now, if you had a measure like that, you just don't play. You count the 6 beats, but you're not playing because it's a rest, it's not a note. Here, the whole note, also worth 6 beats. Why? Because the key signature says, the time signature says 6 beats to the measure. And since it's the only note in the measure, and since it's a whole note, that's automatically worth 6 beats. There is another way of possibly doing it. I probably wouldn't do this, but mathematically it works. If I counted this as having 4, most whole notes are 4 beats, and I put a dot beside it, that automatically gives it 2 more beats, because the dot adds half the value of what it originally was to itself. So therefore, there would be 2 cut this in half and you get 2 more. This dot represents the 2 more, and you can get 6 beats out of that if you're counting the quarter note as 4 beats. But the reason I wouldn't do that, I mean, mathematically it works, I wouldn't do that because you automatically have this whole note as 6 beats because it's the only, it has whatever the measure says it is, and it's already 6 beats. So it would look like this would be at 8 beats, but it actually is 6 beats. I just wouldn't bother with it because it would be confusing. So here are eighths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 eighth notes. That whole measure is a rest. You don't play in that measure. That would be the same equivalent as this, because it's the whole measure is all rested. You don't play anything. Those are all eighth rest. Why not just make a symbol like this, which is a whole rest, which is going to be the same thing? You got to remember there are all kinds of ways of writing music. You know, and sometimes you can write it, and it's going to be the same thing as the same thing as a result of what you're writing. I mean, you can write something and it could be the same thing. I'm going to close very shortly because we're running out of time. Here's your quarter rest and a dot. Here's your quarter rest and a dot. And that dot adds an extra half note. It actually acts an extra half a beat to this, and this dot acts as an extra half a beat. So here you're going to get 3, just as I said, the dotted quarter is worth 3 beats in 6/8 time. Here we are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The dot gives the quarter rest is 2 beats, because 2 beats, if you split it in half, is an eighth. And so therefore that dot adds just another eighth note. So just as this is equivalent of 2 eighths, and the dot gives you that extra eighth, so it becomes 3 beats, this is the same thing. This basically becomes a 3-beat rest, and this becomes a 3-beat rest, and you still have your 6/8 time. Now, it's hard to explain it when you don't know who's understanding what. If you want to ask me any questions, you can always email me here at the studio, and then give me your email address or something, and I'll get back to you if you want to do that. That's 6/8 time. We still have more that I want to show you, and so we'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.